She was a very private person and was not prepared for all of the attention and public life and my dad's notoriety and fame. There was nothing in her past that would have prepared her for that. And it's nothing she ever wanted.
For decades, the story of Johnny Cash and June Carter has been immortalized as one of music's greatest love stories. But this romanticized narrative hides a painful reality, a woman whose existence was deliberately erased from the spotlight, whose suffering was ignored, and whose identity became the target of hatred and threats. That woman was Vivian Liberto, Johnny Cash's first wife and the mother of his 4 daughters. Join us as we uncover the untold story of Vivian Liberto Cash, the woman who inspired I Walk the Line. A love story begun in letters. Before there was Johnny and June, there was Johnny and Vivian, a romance that blossomed through more than 1,000 heartfelt letters exchanged over 3 years. Their story began in the summer of 1951 at a San Antonio roller skating rink where 17-year-old Vivian Liberto met 18-year-old Johnny Cash, then an Air Force trainee. Though their daughters would later receive different versions of exactly how they met, Roseanne was told her father won a bet with friends that he would walk Vivian home, while her younger sisters heard that he deliberately knocked her down while skating. The connection was immediate and intense. After just 3 weeks of dating, Cash shipped off to Germany for military service. What could have been the end of a brief summer romance instead became the foundation of a profound connection maintained through thousands of pages of correspondence. In these letters, now preserved by their daughters, Cash was, quote, earnest, funny, and vulnerable, often signing them with your husband-to-be. In one particularly moving letter, he wrote about mailing her letters back for safekeeping. Quote, on the customs card under description of contents, I put 500 love letters. They are love letters, and those people probably thought they were just the average run-of-the-mill love letters, but they're priceless to me. I love you, Viv, honey. I love you so very, very much. When Cash returned from his military service on July 4, 1954, Vivian later wrote that she, quote, just fell into his arms, he scooped me up, and we kissed. They married the following month at St. Anne's Catholic Church in San Antonio, with Vivian's uncle, Father Vincent Liberto, officiating the Mass. The newlyweds settled in Memphis, where Cash took a job as a vacuum cleaner salesman to support his young family. Within their first year of marriage, Vivian gave birth to their daughter Roseanne, and just a month later, Cash released his first single with Sun Records. This fateful audition was an event Vivian later described as, quote, the 1 hour that would change everything. The descent into darkness.
I had personal problems and bad habits that took a long time to break.
When you were on the pills, did you think you were a better singer because of them?
I thought I was invincible.
As Johnny Cash's star began to rise, his marriage began to crumble. The promising beginning of their life together quickly gave way to long absences, substance abuse, and the temptations of fame. After the success of his early recordings with Sun Records, Cash began touring extensively with other artists like Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison, and Elvis Presley. The constant separation took its toll on Vivian, who was left at home raising their growing family. When Vivian once asked if he was ever tempted to cheat on her during these tours, Cash famously replied, I walk the line for you, a declaration that would inspire his iconic 1956 hit single. Hoping to keep the family together, Vivian agreed to move to California at the urging of Cash's manager. By 1958, after the birth of their third daughter, Cindy, their lives had entered into what Vivian called a dangerous current of Hollywood parties and excess. Cash began falling into drunken stupors and abusing amphetamines. Quote, all of the things that Johnny had called filthy and dirty and had insisted would destroy our lives were things he began to embrace, Vivian wrote in her memoir. In 1961, following the birth of their fourth daughter, Tara, the couple moved to a hilltop home in Casita Springs, California, in a desperate attempt to save their marriage. Instead, the remote location only increased Vivian's isolation. She found herself dispatching rattlesnakes and vermin around the property, while Cash was frequently absent, escaping to Lake Casitas to indulge his growing addictions to fishing, alcohol, and drugs. His behavior made him the regular subject of police attention, most notably when he set off a forest fire during one of his intoxicated outings, resulting in a substantial fine of $82,000. But despite Johnny's destructive behavior, Vivian remained steadfast, primarily blaming his actions on his drug dependency rather than his character. Years later, even after all she endured, she wrote following his death, quote, "To me he is and will always be my wonderful, caring, protective husband." Racial persecution and public humiliation. In 1965, a single photograph thrust Vivian Liberto Cash from relative anonymity into a nightmare of racial hatred and threats. When Johnny Cash was arrested in El Paso, Texas, for smuggling amphetamine pills across the Mexican border, Vivian loyally flew to his side despite their 3-year estrangement. A widely circulated black and white photograph of the couple leaving the courthouse caught the attention of white supremacists who misidentified the Sicilian-American Vivian as black. The Thunderbolt, a racist newsletter published by Ku Klux Klan leader J.B. Stoner, ran a headline declaring, quote, "Arrest exposes Johnny Cash's Negro wife." In the segregated South, where interracial marriage remained illegal in many states, this misidentification sparked outrage among white supremacists. Johnny Cash responded by hiring Nashville lawyer Johnny J. Hooker and threatening a $25 million lawsuit against the KKK. Although the incident temporarily subsided, the KKK renewed their attacks nearly 2 years later, agitated by Cash's criticism of America's treatment of Native Americans and his association with Bob Dylan and other counterculture figures. The harassment intensified, hate mail and death threats poured in. Flyers were distributed at Cash's concerts, urging people to call a phone number that played readings from the Thunderbolt article, and a voice declared that, quote, "The race mixers of this country continue to sell records to your teenage children." The couple faced a boycott across the South, with venues canceling Cash's performances. Saul Holliff, Johnny's manager, confronted the situation by meeting with Robert Shelton, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and threatening a $200,000 lawsuit for harassment. Holliff also contacted newspapers to correct the story and arranged for research into Vivian's background, compiling documentation that included her designation as white on her Texas marriage certificate and letters attesting to her racial identity. The Betrayal and Erasure. While Vivian endured racial persecution and managed a household with 4 young daughters, Johnny Cash was building a new relationship with June Carter. Vivian had long harbored suspicions about her husband's fidelity. She noticed his growing absences, discovered receipts for extravagant gifts, and received hints from his bandmates and family members about his relationship with fellow singer June Carter. In Vivian's memoir, she recounted an incident where Carter allegedly confronted her directly, saying, quote, "Vivian, he will be mine." Her co-author, Ann Sharpstein, later explained, quote, "She wanted people to know June went after Johnny. This is where most of her pain and anger rested all these years." By 1966, exhausted by years of abandonment, substance abuse, and infidelity, Vivian filed for divorce. The decision was devastating for the devout Catholic, who described losing her husband to another woman as a degrading, horrible experience. The Catholic Church even excommunicated her because of the divorce, forbidding her from taking communion. It wasn't until Johnny wrote a letter to the Archdiocese, taking full responsibility for their failed marriage and acknowledging his failings as a husband and father, that Vivian was welcomed back into the church. After the divorce was finalized in 1967, Johnny quickly married June Carter, and the narrative of Johnny and June as the great American love story began to take shape. Vivian, meanwhile, was relegated to a footnote in Cash's biography, often portrayed as a bitter, controlling figure who had held back his talents. This characterization reached its peak in the 2005 Oscar-winning film Walk the Line, which presented a highly sanitized version of Cash's life that minimized Vivian's importance and contributions.
When she was writing her book, she said, "There are things you kids don't even know. That's why I want to write the book." She was frightened. She was grief-stricken. I would come home from school wondering if my mom was going to be alive.
Adding salt to the wound, June Carter frequently claimed in TV interviews that she was raising her, quote, 7 children, including Vivian's 4 daughters, with Johnny. Now it's time to hear from you. What part of the story was most surprising to hear about? Let us know in the comments section below.